Hello, hello. All right. If you're hearing this, do me a favor, pop into chat and just tell me that you can hear me and that the audio is okay. I might need to increase the gain. There we go. I just increased the gain a little bit, maybe a little bit too much. I don't know. Audio is a crazy field. All right, tell me how it's going. And I'm a little bit early today. I kind of want to get started a little early, so I'm going to jump in 1 second. Kosen says the audio is good. Okay. All right. So yeah, it looks like it's in the yellow. Let me know if it gets too loud, guys. Occasionally I burst out with sound every now and then. And let's hit the recording. Okay. Dun 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 dun. Okay. All right. Welcome back, guys. Day 4. All right. So we have one more day for enrollment. So make sure that if you're going to join me this round, you get in there and sign up for this and sign up for this class. All right. And as a reminder, you're getting Anatomy for the Artists in this July drop, and you're getting figure sculpting, 4-week figure sculpting class. All right. So now, excuse me, that done and said, we were supposed to talk about legs today. So I think what we're going to do is just we're going to focus on legs, like we said, and then we're going to try to fit the arm into the conversation and work the arm as well. I think the leg becomes really important because the pelvis is actually, in order to understand the butt and stuff like that, you really end up starting to talk about the leg itself. But don't worry, we're going to get to the arm and we're going to get that part explained. So we got today, we got tomorrow. What's one thing that out of these next 2 days, if you learned it or if you had it explained, it would completely help you become a better sculptor? Leave that in the comments below so that I can look at that and just review and see what actually would make a difference. Okay, and if you guys don't mind, I think I'm going to jump right into it. Let's go into the screen, and then as a reminder, you got 1 day to sign up, and you are getting Anatomy for Artists, you are getting figure sculpting, and you can look at the other live sessions that we've done to see how strong the content is and if that's going to fit what you need. And then as a reminder, my name is Ryan Kingslien, and I train traditionally at the Pennsylvania Academy, which no longer exists as in the same way, unfortunately. And then I also helped build ZBrush, and I was one of the first employees there at ZBrush, helping to create the world we all get to play in now. It was quite a wonderful experience. These are the courses: torso, the head, the arm, and the leg. Those are going to come September, end of September. You should have everything. And then, of course, we're getting that 4 weeks if we join in this, right? And you've got your options. You got monthly payments, and you've got your one-time payment here, and all your FAQs right there to work with. Okay, let's get in and see what kind of trouble we can get into today. Okay, I'm just reading through comments. Wakosen is saying, I need to learn how to sculpt more freely. Currently, I'm too worried about getting the model exactly what it's supposed to be after the first few strokes. Yep. Nosen, the hip leg connections and knee demystified would help. All right, we're actually going to cover that today. So that is good timing. Sculpting freely, that's a bit of a beast. Part of it's a mental game. But then also part of it is just learning a system that you start to apply, right? So the anxiety that we have when we create artwork, it has a reason for being there. And the anxiety is usually telling us something. So if we're fixated on getting something right, part of that's the mental game. You just need to give yourself permission. But another part of it is that you just don't feel like you have a system that really is fluid and is working for you. So that's one of the things that I'm hoping to show you guys here, is that there's a system for construction. And there are things that we look for that'll help us from there. So I'll keep that in mind as we go through this leg building that we're going to do today. All right. Step number 1. We got to basically transfer all of this wonderful sculpting that we have done here. We have to transfer this into our model that has, all of the parts. So this model is our one that's kind of cut up. This model is the one that, has all the rest of the pieces of the puzzle. So I'm fine with this. Yeah, I'm gonna divide this about 4 million polygons, and I'm gonna show both the sculpt and this one on top of each other. And I just want to, in fact, we might want to move this down to the bottom. I just want to make small adjustments just to make sure that these guys are relatively close and in line with each other. Big steps like that, I'll kind of pull the form in. That head needs to get moved. Yeah, that would have been a slight problem. And the rest of that, I think, is within range. Oh, that's quite far. And I like to just come in and press Alt. There we go. All right, now we've got about 4 million polygons. So now the next thing I'm going to do before I get into this process is I'm going to store morph targets so that I've got something that's got all this basic geometry that I can restore. Okay, and then I'm going to go into the subtools and make sure that just these two are visible. I'm going to go down to project and just turn color off. We don't really care about color. We're going to set geometry, leave that on, and we're just going to say project all. Okay, and just let it project. We're going to see how much detail we're able to actually capture. Turn solo mode on. You can see we have some problems here. So these problems that we are seeing, these problems relate to distance. It's just too far. So the easiest thing to do is just come into those areas, right? And then, of course, let's get rid of the... there, I want to get rid of the coloring. And you can see here, it's like it just did not get any of that. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, and we want to make sure that we're doing this. Do you see that? See how far in that is? Don't worry about being too precise, right? Because we're going to project all of this again. I just really need volumes in order for that projection to kind of capture. Push that in. Ba, 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 ba. Okay, we're gonna fix some of the cray that you're seeing, but one step at a time. That looked like that. And a whole swath of it there. Okay, and we need to push in the butt. We can increase the project distance too, but I'm trying to minimize that right now. That has other problems that arise. Okay. All right, largely intact. So now let's go in our geometry, and we're going to lower this down. Look at our poly. Look at our poly frame. Anywhere where it's like real cray-cray, you're going to smooth it out. Okay, and then we can go up a subdivision level, and we can smooth that out. You could also just delete the higher. So we could just say, where's my delete higher? Delete higher, and we could just redivide that back to 3 million, 4 million right there. Okay. And so now our model is like roughly positioned. It's a little bit better. Turn solo mode off and go through that process again. Okay. Now back into solo mode. This is our model. We got one remaining problem. Well, two right there. That one I think is relatively, this one here is relatively easy to address. Okay, there you go. Okay. All right, so that's the power of digital sculpting, folks, is that, you know, we can have these little pieces we work on, and then we go in and we project these in. All right, now, early on, I had you store a morph target, and so we can switch that out, and you can see that's like basically a layer, but it's like a single layer that just stores, says this is a bucket, and what I'm going to do now is come in with the morph brush, and I'm going to use the morph brush on the edges and just blend it so it's a little bit better. And by better I mean I don't have like crazy geometry. Dun, 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 dun. I'm smoothing this out. I'm not really doing that. That's a problem right there, that piece of geometry. Is that... that's a bad piece of geometry right there. But I'll have to live with it. Okay. I think we're relatively clean now, and we can kind of continue our sculpting process. Any questions about what I've just done? Okay, I feel good about that. I'm going to delete the morph target because they actually take up memory. It stores an entire another version of your model. And I'm going to make sure that I have these two active and in split mode. So the original scan and my sculpt that's now had the information projected into it. And now with this, I'm going to go through and try to identify and create, you know, the structure of the legs. Okay, and I think we'll start with this one because it's the least confusing. The other limb is obfuscated by the arm itself, but then also there's a twist involved in that could kind of be a little nutty for everybody. All right, any questions? Sculpted stash. Do we need to get the anatomy course before tuning into the live classes? Yes. There's just one thing that we drop, and that's it's all comes together. Rick, it's really difficult to articulate what I'm looking to learn, but with a good foundation of how things look statically, now I'm hoping to learn how to translate it dynamically. Okay. Marcel, the original sculpture you're copying is a scan of a real person or a scan of a sculpture? This is a scan of an academic sculpture from the 1800s. Very specifically, I wanted that time frame, and I wanted somebody who had codified anatomy according to certain rules. This is actually intended for marble. Do you guys see the? It's intended for marble enlargement. Do you see the little pieces? These are actually. These are points. These are screws, metal screws that are drilled into the plaster, and used for the pointing machine. And they're fantastic for calibration. All right. Let's start with this leg. Yeah, perfecto. Okay. Let's start by understanding the anatomy a little bit. I'm going to use my pen A brush. We're going to we're going to set the focal shift to -20. That's really the strongest. And then go from there. Let me just move my mic a little bit. Sorry. Okay. I got closer to the screen. Okay, and let's save this because I do not want to have to reproject all of that again. Gnosis, how do you approach sculpting something like this in clay at a big scale? There's a couple of answers to that. How do you sculpt something like this in big scale? So it depends on what your how do I say this? I mean, if you're talking like old school, how do you just build something like you're just trying to maybe do a study or whatnot, then it's a lot of measurement. But if you're actually in production, you're doing something, say, for film, or you're doing something for, say, a monument, you can look at, say, Sabin Howard. Have you seen his monument? Why is that taking so long to save? So this is at the this is right next to the White House in Washington, D.C. And so this was actually, these actors, these models were actually scanned, so that it comes from scans, and then they were enlarged using traditional methodologies, which means that basically they were milled in foam, and then they did what's called a clay layup, where they put the clay over the top of it. And Sabin, he went the extra step. Like, he basically resculpted this entire thing after it had been moved into clay. I assume mostly just so it had that clay quality, or it had his touch, and he was controlling it, as much as humanly possible. Necessary, not necessary, I don't know. If you look at Richard McDonald and his work, he'll do a clay at 24 inches, and then he'll have that milled in foam at whatever size, and then they do a clay layup, just, I don't know, centimeter of clay all over the surface, maybe a little bit less. And then they just make sure that the surface is the quality and has the texturing that they want. So the answer is, if you're doing this for real, you actually scan it and then do a clay layup. Does that make sense? Marcel, so your way of sculpting the figure in pose is to use square shapes to build the pose, Dynamesh. I can't simplify it like that for you, sorry. My suggestion is actually to just go through the day 1, 2, 3. And, just listen to them at 2 speed, crush through them real quick. It'll explain it, but that is missing so much information that it's hard to answer. But you'll get a sense of it today if you're when we do the leg, I'll go through all of it again. Sculpted stash. Is the figure sculpting asymmetrical studies the most efficient way to improve? No, the most efficient way to improve is to sculpt something that's real. So, sculpt something by observation, not imagination, which is, we're doing this by observation. No, so for an original piece, you could do it digitally first and then somehow materialize a scaffolding. I think I understand what you're saying, but there's a couple of variables, and I've been dealing with them a lot lately. So hopefully you guys know my Instagram. If not, come in and make sure to give me a follow. So this is a sculpt I did. This is it's part of a series where I'm trying to capture the violence of childhood, and this is just the beginning. But the idea is, I sculpted this in ZBrush. You see the teddy bear in the back, and then this is milled in marble and then finished. So there's so many different ways that we can do this. And I've learned a lot about marble carving, but it's so laborious. I don't know what we're going to do in terms of, the future. Like, I'm actually looking at 3D printing sculptures now. And then I'll cast them in resin or something like that. There's a guy, let me see, Sculpture Junkies. No, that's not the one. I have to go through my messages 1 second. Like this guy. Love his work. And so he's also looking at how we kind of do a lot of this stuff right now, including 3D printing. So that's 3D printed. And then from that 3D print, can we then start to create an actual piece, that I don't know, sellable, presentable. There's a lot of variety. There's a lot of variables, I should say. You can 100% get the surface of a 3D print to match whatever you sculpt in clay or anywhere else. That's 100% possible. The problem is that the material of resin's not archival. There's a million problems. If you have resin inside of this, like liquid resin, it will literally eat the resin over time. And within a month, it'll just eat a hole into your sculpture and disappear. So, you can 3D print, but right now you still have to get it into some material like resin, which is what this sculptor talks a lot about. Like, say, for example, I think this is resin. Yeah, it's acrylic resin. Or you get it into bronze, which is expensive, or you get into marble, which is expensive, all that stuff. And so, resin's pretty straightforward process, I think. This is another one that's 3D printed. I mean, the surface, you're going to get the surface quality. That's not an issue, I think. They were talking about firing it. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, enough of that. We got a lot of work. Any more questions, let me know. I'm going to check here in just a second. But let's get to work. Yeah, they're giant printers, right? I actually have an orange storm. That still hasn't been assembled yet. A friend of mine is going to come over and I think assemble it on Monday. That's how big that thing is. There's lots of problems with running it, though. Like always, 3D printing is a hobbyist domain like this, at this price point. In order to have this more stable and not have problems, you're talking about $100,000 printer. So I'll take the hobbyist at 2,500. It's just never existed at that price. All right, anatomy. What do we need to do? Let's first, when we focus on anatomy, we need to focus on landmarks. So what are the landmarks that we need to evaluate for the pelvis area? Okay, sorry, I have to address this. File. Okay, delete undo history. Okay, do I have any? 14,000. Do I have anything I can delete? Not really. I'm trying to lower the file size so that when it auto saves, it doesn't take forever to do its thing. Okay, 13 seconds I can manage. All right, first thing we need to do, ASIS. What's going on? Okay, we're going to take that wing of the ilium up. We're going to take it down. And then if you remember from the last session, the best way to think about is that you have a triangle that then goes up. And that's where the wings of the ilium are going to be. I think this needs to go up as well. Yeah, that'll be fine. Okay, then when we come down, you got to find where is the great trochanter. I'm going to put it there, although I'm a little bit uncomfortable. Here, I'm pretty clear. That's the great trochanter. And so now, depending on somebody's build, this can either be something that pushes out or something that, in our case, is pushed in. And so, you know, the general rule, let's say if you have a hip, let's just do a simple structure, come down. You have your great trochanter right here. And then if the other muscles are kind of small, then you'll have something like this. And you actually see the great trochanter there. But if the other muscles around there are actually quite built up, then the great trochanter is going to appear as a divot. And that's a rule with all bony landmarks, is that they're either pushed in or pulled out. Everything depends upon whether the muscles are flooded out around it or whether or not the muscles have receded around it. Part of the architecture. All right, so once we know that, then we come down to the knee. And what we're looking for in the knee is the patella. And so the knee, you can say, is basically a box, right? And within that box, the top half of that, you can say, all right, somewhere right in there, that's my patella. And the patella is always obvious. I mean, this is the patella. It doesn't hide. Okay, down from the patella becomes a tendon. And you can see that tendon here. The tendon, if you're eagle-eyed, you might notice it's actually pushing in. The tendon's pushing in because around that is fat pads that help lubricate that knee, so to speak. And that tendon comes down to what's called the tibial tuberosity. Okay. Then also on the outside of that is what's called ischial spines. I'm forgetting what they're called. Epicondyles. Sorry, that was a little crazy. We could say, let's get rid of the patella. we can just draw the bone itself, and we're going to go up and up like that, and it's going to go that way. Yeah, that. So that's going to be the femur. On the edge of the knee, these are what they call epicondyles. I forget what's Y and what's W. So there is a lateral epicondyle, and that's on the outside. It's actually right there. And then there's a medial epicondyle, which is on the inside. And you can feel these on your own knee. You'll feel them, they're bony as hell, and they're right kind of on either side of the patella for the most part. Okay, so now when I'm coming in, let's go ahead and get rid of this and see. I'm going to say, where's my patella? And it's a juicy piece right there. And then I'm going to get that tendon down to the tibial tuberosity, about right there. And then, of course, this is just internal structures. And there's going to be a hint of an epicondyle right there. And there'll be a hint. This one's actually harder to see. There'll be a hint of an epicondyle right there. And ultimately, if I was to draw this, let's just make this great trochanter larger. What you're seeing right here is the actual femur. And it comes down like that. And then there is the tibia, which comes down like that. So the femur, if you're like standing, that's the word, Ryan. If you're standing, this is what the leg generally looks like. You know, you've got this nice little bend to it. The femur comes on this way, but then as this moves down, the top of the tibia is pretty much universal. It's got one shape, but this starts to rock. So there's this rocker, this oval that rocks. Like that. There's a little bit more to it, and then the patella slides in there and it protects that open space. That's what the patella is doing. The patella is locked in to the tibial tuberosity. So it's not locked in to whatever the femur is doing. The femur is again the upper thigh bone. The femur is it's moving and articulating with the tibial tuberosity within the knee, and it moves the patella, but the patella is locked to the tibia. And so when you know that, it just makes things a little bit easier to kind of try to figure out. All right, let's go ahead and undo that so it doesn't mess up our bones later on. We'll continue the muscles, or not muscles, but the bones. When you come in, remember, there was the tibial tuberosity, the tibia, sorry. I'm going to draw that in. And then the tibia, right here, this is known as, that's your shin. You get kicked right there. As you get older, if you get cut right there, it takes forever to heal. This is a part of your body that's very sensitive. It takes a long time to heal, and it's pure bone. If you have more body fat, like, yeah, it'll get obfuscated. But for the most part, this is an area that is it's exposed in all humans. And so the tibia, if we're going to draw it from this angle, the tibia is going to come down, and it has this nice little shape and grabs this malleolus right there. Pulls out. That is what's called a malleolus. And that is not how you spell it. Sorry. I had to register my daughter for high school today. So I almost had an autistic attack inside this gymnasium. as nobody really knew what was happening, and you had to repeat. And I mean, I'm just like wandering around this place, freaking out, trying not to freak out, I should say. She said I just looked confused, which is good, because inside I was like boiling with rage at this insanely inefficient system. So a good majority of my brain cells are done, and they aren't coming back today. So this is the spelling you get, and hopefully Google help us. We'll go from there. This is called what, though? You have a choice. This is called the lateral, or it's called the medial. Which one is it? You decide. It's called the medial epicondyle, or it's called the lateral epicondyle. All right, now, so that bone, if I was to draw this again, that's the the malleolus, that's the tibia. Then there is another bone right here on the outside, just like that. And let me go ahead and erase the tibia just to make it clear. And that's called the fibula, right? And the fibula ends in another malleolus that is either lateral or medial. The inside, thank you guys, the inside is medial. The outside is lateral. And that's across the board. So you just always, the body, it goes towards the midline of the body, and anything that's on that side, the inside, that's medial. Anything that's outside, that's lateral. Okay, and so now we can see that. Let's go ahead and erase some of the sketching that we did. That is our lateral malleolus going upwards. This is actually the top of the fibula right there. So you need to make sure you know where that is. Okay. Then on the inside, don't forget this is actually going to be tibia, coming down to the tibial tuberosity. And then we're going to have the line of the shin coming down to the medial malleolus. It could be called the an epicondyle, but it's not. It's just called a malleolus, so we deal with it. All right? Those are the bony structures that we need to be mindful of. Any questions about those? There's not much more than that you need to be mindful of, in my opinion. I'll let you guys work. Okay, now, when we start going through the musculature, okay, then this is a little bit different. So let's go dark red, okay? I'm going to start with the pelvis and start to dissect and try to understand some of what's going on. But in general, in the pelvis, you're going to have the ASIS and you're going to have the pubic symphysis. There's going to be essentially three muscles there's going to be the TFL, there's going to be the gluteus medius, and then there's going to be the gluteus maximus. Now, besides getting you amazing TV show syndication rights, the gluteus maximus is considered to be the one muscle that separates us from the chimpanzees, from the monkeys. Not to say that any one of us is closer or farther. I don't know you personally, so I can't tell where you are on that spectrum. But the thing that has enabled you to stand upright and, of course, get amazing syndication on reality TV shows is your gluteus maximus. Robert Beverly Hale, that actually comes from Robert Beverly Hale. Your maximus is a unique muscle in humans. I'm not saying that horses don't have gluteus maximus. I'm saying the way ours is structured, That's one of the most important things for us standing upright. And when you understand the gluteus maximus more, that might make more sense because of the way it connects to the pelvis and to the legs. So with that done and said, we have these three muscles. And I tell you, this rock is really getting annoying. Yes, much better. The muscle of the TFL comes from the ASIS. You have to have the ASIS for that to fully function, and then this is going to, I am actually going to get rid of this and just focus on the surface topology. You won't need to find the form and head towards wherever that great trochanter is. Okay, but there's a problem. The problem is that the TFL does not come straight for that great trochanter, and we can see that in our anatomy figure. So if we come in and we say, let's say, where's my TFL? Let's say TFL. Here, let's do that. TFL, and then let's do the gluteus medius. I didn't have the TFL show. And where's my medius? There we go. Could always organize that better. What do you see in this structure? Great trochanter, and the TFL is actually heading somewhere else. The gluteus medius, yeah, that comes. The gluteus maximus, okay, that goes down below. So there's another structure here that's really relevant to our conversation, and that's what's called the IT band. No, that is not your local IT employees at work. Let me see if it's in here. IT. Voila. And this is something you actually, in many cases, you won't even see this. If you look at Paul Richer, you do see this. He does show you where it is, but you can't always be guaranteed that you're going to be able to see it. Mostly what you'll see is a divot within the vastus lateralis itself. Right there. So we'll see in our model, but it might create like a little divot as it comes in, and then the vastus lateralis kind of bows out on either side. But we'll get to that in a second. What's most important out of this conversation, though, is that you understand that the IT band is kind of below that great trochanter, right? So with that done and said, as I come back into this model, my TFL is not heading towards wherever that great trochanter is. That's not what's happening. What's happening is it's heading down here. But we have a problem, all right? And this is a problem you see in all anatomy. So the problem is, if I know that the TFL is basically going from ASIS to, the side of wherever that great trochanter is, then why is the TFL not just going like this? Let me paint this out. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Why does the TFL not just go like, hey, I'm right here, folks? Why is it not linear? Does anybody have an answer? That's actually quite similar to what happens up here in the arm, because we know that the pectoralis has a point right here, and we know that it's actually inserting over here. So why in God's name does it not just create a linear track? Why is it some crazy kind of curve? Even after I said there are no concavities in nature, here the dang thing is caving in. Anybody know? Anybody know why the TFL, why the pectorals, why they don't make a linear line? And the reason is because of fascia. And the elements of the of fascia, ligaments, we're all basically mummies. And so we have these regions of fascia that wrap around like bandages. So the leg has one. And then the leg meets the pelvis one that's wrapping around like this. Okay? So you've got forms like this going, then you've got forms like this going, and then they kind of blend, right? And they're moving all the way out to the butt. So these are actually, in these particular regions, these are creating the concavity that you're actually seeing. They're influencing the muscle. And so what happens within that space is that the muscles kind of, they work through these like little tubes. They're not linear, but they're sliding back and forth within these structures. The fascia is insanely strong. You know, does anybody here work out and they say, hey, we're going to break up your fascia, so let's go do a little bit of massage, and it like hurts a little bit? Has anybody ever done that? When I used to work out, I paid for a trainer, got jacked, and then I realized that all billionaires look like frogs. So I've been slowly trying to transition myself into a frog, so that I can become a billionaire. But back then, when I was deluded and I thought that working out actually meant financial wealth and health and all that other stuff, when I accepted the lie of the fitness industry, I had a personal trainer, and we did these painful massages afterwards. And the general consensus now is that fascia is so strong that massage is effectively useless in terms of manipulating fascia. Fascia is not something that you could just massage into place. It is incredible, so strong that it's controlling all the muscles in your body and bending them to its will. And that's something to think about. All right, but anyways, when we look at the TFL, just to get this long-windedness out of the way, the TFL is going to come down from that, and then it starts to bend because of fascia. Fascia is distorting it to its will, about like that. And you'll always see that it'll always be a break, like it always breaks. So just keep that in mind. Okay, now the gluteus medius is generally going to come from somewhere back here, and it's a little hard to see because this this piece right here. So if I kind of get rid of that a little bit more, it might be a little easier. But really, you see the gluteus medius really well on this side. So on this side, you can actually see, all right, so the gluteus medius, look at that. That's all gluteus medius heading down. That's not maximus, that's medius. And then TFL. And then the medius has a couple of different forms to it, so to speak. And then down here, this is going to be then now all maximus as it comes down. And it connects the maximus. You want to say wherever that great trochanter is, you want to drop down a couple of inches, and you can quite clearly see the maximus going that way. So now we can do the same thing. We look and we're saying, all right, well, there it is. That's the bulk. You're coming down to wherever that great trochanter is. Voila. And then the maximus is going to come down and continue its structure a little bit further down. Of course, we're sitting on it. Does that part make sense? Let's get this a little bit more clean. I really don't have it. Oh, that's why. Oh, that was a problem. Don't do that, Ryan. All right, I'm going to divide that one more time, so it's going to be a little bit better. Ugh, there's just not enough geometry there, guys. So I'd have to redo the topology, which I am disinclined to do at this stage. I think you guys can kind of get a general sense of it. But let me know if you have confusion and you're a little unsure of what's what. And I'll do my best to explain it better. But now we move into the other muscles. Okay. So let's look at the quads. The quad means 4, right? But the quads are really 2 muscles that you have to have 3 muscles that you have to be aware of. We have to be aware of the latissimus. Sorry, that's my brain. It left me this morning. The vastus lateralis is this muscle right here. And the vastus lateral, this kind of comes around here, and it has, you can see it from the anatomy figure. If we go in and hide the IT band, and I think if we hide the gluteus, so let's go, really I just need the TFL. Hide the TFL, vastus lateralis. Yeah. So you can see the vastus lateralis kind of originating right up here near the great trochanter and then winding its way down the shaft of the femur and then coming down and inserting largely into the patella group. Okay. So with that understanding in tow, we're going to take the vastus lateralis and just kind of try to blend that in. But notice that there's a muscle body, right? And so you can see that the muscle body is right here, and then after this, it just becomes thinner. These are little characteristics that you learn as you kind of go through it. Okay, so that's the edge of the vastus lateralis. But in order to get the top of this, it's actually wiser for us to look at the next muscle in this conversation, which is the rectus femoris, because that sits on top. You see how it sits right there on top. Okay, and the rectus femoris, what's important about the rectus femoris is that it inserts into a point of the pelvis that's below the ASIS. Notice how there's a gap. So this is called anterior superior iliac spine. And what the rectus femoris connects to is what's called the anterior inferior iliac spine. So this changes. It's not a superior, it's an inferior. Anterior means front. Inferior means below something else, iliac spine. So now, with that done and said, when we look at our model, we know right off the bat that this rectus femoris, it doesn't connect up here to the ASIS. It's connecting to the AIIS. And that's what creates this plane right there. I'm getting more into the anatomy than I I intended. This is actually all the stuff we're going to cover in the live class. The TFL is on this side of it, and what we need to know about it is that the rectus femoris connects to the top of this guy. So if we want, we can close this out a little bit. Yeah. So we're going to come up. If you look at this view, if you're a little eagle-eyed, you might notice that there is a shift right here. There's just something where the volume changes. This is going to be the vastus lateralis. This is going to be the rectus femoris. And we can follow that all the way around until we get to the other shift in that, which should be about right there. And so that becomes rectus femoris as it goes right in there. Does not connect to the ASS, but connects below that. And then comes down and connects to the pelvis, or to the patella. How are we doing here? You're getting a ton of information, and it's eating up a ton of our time. But is it useful? Is it making sense? Okay, and then on this side, we have the vastus lateralis, and the vastus lateralis comes down off that. Let's come down off the... I'm just going to draw a beeline to the ASIS, and I'll explain that in a second. This is vastus lateralis. Sorry, medialis. I'm drawing this beeline because there is a muscle and a plane that comes all the way down from the ASIS down here to right about here. And this is called the sartorius. It's a beautiful muscle. It's really great. Just a wonderful muscle. And it separates out the quads from, I think it's the adductors. I always forget. And I don't hold that against myself anymore because it's ADD or ABD, so it could be the abductors. I don't know. Again, Google it, you'll find out. But it's a group of muscles here on the inside that have a different role in how the leg moves. Okay, and those adductors, those all come down, and they do a couple of things. They come down along the side here. They help create this big old volume. And then we get our hamstrings in the back. And so barely in here is going to be the bicep femoris. And the bicep femoris has a long head and a short head. And so there you go. So there's a lot of interesting things happening. And when we get in sculpt, I've mentioned this, sculpting to me is problem solving. So if I know insertion and I know origin, and I know something about what influences it from point A to point B, I have the beginnings of a system that I can use. And that's what I'm going to implement next, is just how do I start to build that way? Because it's a structural system. And earlier there was this question of, so you create these, I think the question was you create these blocky structures, and then you go and dynamesh it and on from there. And this is the part where you'll get to see how the process works. A little bit more detailed, a little bit more fleshed out than that. And that's the end of the anatomy section of today. Now we get in and we actually get where the rubber hits the road. I don't really need to see the anatomy anymore because I already know it. So I'm going to get rid of it. One thing one of my teachers said was, in the beginning, you may just need to say the names of the muscles as you sculpt them, and then eventually they just become internalized. All right, so let's find our bony landmarks. And let's do this with a flat alpha. Yeah, that's fine. That's a problem. Let's make sure we move that back. Okay. Don't do it yet, Ryan. I'm just getting a little bit of the shoe. Medial malleolus. One of the first things I like to do as I go through and I start to find these is create this. That looks messy, but what you should notice is I've created planes. And they're rotating in space. That's really important because that's basically what that does. If you look over here, bop, 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 bop. And that's my goal. Okay, I'm going to get the epicondyle a little bit clearer here and get the box of this. I'm going to kind of create the head of the tibia a little bit more clearly in here. Head of the tibia. I'm just going to carve into some of this I don't care about. And so, you know, I am putting bony landmarks. What the bejesus? All right, sorry. Patella is actually pretty locked. And down. Okay. That part is done. So once I have the bone in there, let's make sure. Okay. I'm going to stop for a second. I'm often asked questions that are along the lines of how I get better. And I answered a few of those today. But there is one thing that is, I feel probably, because I'm doing it now, I feel it's more important to call attention to than almost anything else. And that is that you actually focus on joints. I can know in 10 seconds where somebody is in their sculpting experience just by looking at joints. How's your wrist? How's your elbow? Shoulder is a joint, right? Hips are a joint. Knees are an obvious joint. Ankles are a joint. How is the structure there? And what I want you to notice is that in my process, the joints are paramount. So I haven't even sculpted muscle. What I have sculpted was anatomical landmarks of the pelvis, anatomical landmarks of the knee, and anatomical landmarks of the not a wrist, ankle. Wow. I sculpted those anatomical bony landmarks, and so now the muscle is really, it's just A to B. I'm just trying to get A to B now because I've locked on where A is, I've locked on where B is, and now I'm just creating the space in between. But if the A is not accurate, then no matter what I do from there, it's all going to be wrong. All right, and so now I'll get the IT band roughly. I'm going to separate the vastus lateralis from the hamstrings on the bottom. So you can see that's this line I'm drawing, that's this line. And this line has to go above the head of the fibula. So that's really important that I know. And then later on, I'm going to have the bicep femoris building volume there. And I'll do this from a couple of views because, you know. And really, like you can see, it's planes. So again, it was mentioned earlier that you create these blocky structures. The appropriate terminology for that would be that you're creating planes. And planes are not, they're not straight. They're not, everybody thinks planes are like, that's a plane. And the plane is like, it's this rectangular thing like that. That's not the only planes that exist. Planes are also these curves. You can have a curved plane, right? Geometrically, that's, I think, possible. I could be wrong. And if it's not wrong, then screw geometry. Or if it's not right, I mean. Connecting point A to point B. Sculpting down the form. I am sculpting the vastus lateralis, but I'm thinking of the vastus lateralis as a structural entity. Gluteus medius, or sorry, maximus. What the? I haven't saved. That's a problem. Okay, 1 second. Vivian, you go to transform and set your split slider to 1. It's as simple as that. And just make sure that you've got, you know, multiple subtools. So these are 2 subtools of each other. Transform, split is set to 1. There you go. We are definitely not getting to the arms today, guys. So tomorrow we can make a decision if we're going to do head. I'm going to leave it as head, so you'll get an email that says we're going to focus on the head. But, you know, if you guys send me a note and say arms, then we'll do that. Oh my God, it's too long to save this. Sorry, folks. "47 seconds is too long." I'm going to delete some things. All right, next time I save, hopefully it'll be faster. Okay, let's get the long head, the short head. I forget which head this is of the hamstring. Notice that I am evaluating its trajectory. Make sure you got that working. Okay, let's look at the rectus femoris. We're going to come in and continue the arc. I'm going to carve a line in here real quick just to, I'll do this often where I just carve planes just to make some forms real clear. And then later on I go and I blend it back out. Really going to be wise to get the sartorius. And again, this is what we study anatomy for. You know, I don't, you know, sartorius, like the names, I don't know. You need to know the names because that's how you learn. Like you store that information. So when you try to recall it, it's much harder to recall if you're like, dang, ain't there something like hanging around the wheelbarrow thingy? You know, but if that's how it stores in the beginning, then and it's the wheelbarrow thingy, if it's the strap, then that's fine. Okay, and there's a form right here I need to indicate. That comes down pretty far. Do you see how my brush works in these strokes? Down and across. And I use that to create structure. Structure. Planar structure. Across the form to kind of integrate. Is it making sense how these planes get created? I actually feel really happy with that. This structure's a little off. So remember, you can always come into the move brush. You have to be careful. Like, you could call it cheating. I'm not worried about cheating. What I'm worried about is creating loose form, which is a real fear. But this is one of the advantages of digital. I get to make these corrections like this. Okay, let's do this other leg if you don't mind. Even though it's so obfuscated, I'm going to cut across here because this is actually that plane that we talked about right here. I generally actually turn that into a triangle. Not necessarily a plane, but I turn that into a triangle. And so I see that triangle right there. And you know, you see it here as well. That triangle continues the planes of the pelvis. So I'm going to just kind of carve that in a little bit. I'm going to find my sartorius. And this is where I'm doing imaginative work at this point. And I'm failing at my number 1, which is get the bony landmarks established. The sartorius is kind of like a bony, I mean, it's like that kind of landmark to me. Okay, tibial tuberosity is about right there. And then let's get medial malleolus. Get the lateral malleolus. Let's just make sure that we've got it roughly. Okay, and then that's going to come up, and I sense it's right there. Yeah, it's right there. All right, let's go with this. And I'm going to work on the imagination now. So say the patella's there. I'm going to say the sartorius is coming around to the inside. It's creating this kind of larger fat there. We haven't really got into this muscle just yet, but I'm going to just simplify this area a little. This is going to be the vastus lateralis. This becomes the adductors. The adductors kind of separate right there. And the hamstrings in the back. The hamstrings are going to, where is that? So that's going to be the vastus lateralis in there. That is hamstring. The hamstring disappears underneath the butt. The vastus lateralis is going to have some volume here. It looks like an epicondyle right there, and it looks like an epicondyle right there as well. On either side, the rectus femoris. Okay, let's make that a little cleaner of a plane. Form concepts are really important, so I'm making sure that this stays, you know, relatively cylindrical. Okay. The gastrocnemius and the thigh, I don't have time to go through a lot of this, which it needs time. So we'll just have to do that in, make sure that you guys get all of that in the live. This is, without a doubt, some of the most confusing, difficult areas. Because the plane changes are a little hard to kind of observe off the bat. So I'm excited to walk you guys through that. Once you understand a couple of things about it, though, it does become much easier. I am going to separate out the medial malleolus. Okay, of course. This needs a lot more love. But the easy solution right off the bat is that you actually just start to turn it into a shoe. Ah. Come on. And I think at this sculpture, his feet are a little short. I always like to look at it from below and say, does it look like a shoe? Okay. The muscles are going to go on the inside, but there's a lot of skeletal structure there. Crazy. How much time are we at? An hour and 20 minutes, folks. How are we doing? How we doing? Sup? I like that idea of doing wrists today, because we have them right here, right? What is going on with my brush? It doesn't normally do that. Yeah, this not nice. Let's go brush. Let's go auto masking and turn back face masking on. Okay, it's a little better. let's go and just crush that back in and then come back. Okay. I'm just, am I thinking about anatomy here? Not really. I'm looking at structure at planes and, you know, my particular way of establishing planes. I'm also thinking about gesture, though. I mean, are you noticing there's this gesture that's happening? Dun, 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 dun. And all of that needs to lift up. Okay. I'm going to fill this space in. I take a plane down here to just separate out the thumb. Build the thumb volume a little bit. And I shouldn't say volume, structure, like I'm just making these little blocky structures. And then of course the thumb is kind of destroyed in there, so I'm going to leave that alone. And then this is really important, this gesture of getting and then that crosses. I'm not too worried about that. Okay. And then I don't know if you guys remember this from yesterday, but I chew edges. I chew edges. I don't even know what that means, man. That just sounds weird. All right. That's a good, like, block in for me to cause trouble with later. With enough form, so to speak. And let's just tighten that up with the actual leg anatomy, and then we can move on. Now there's a little trick I like to do in the legs. I like to make sure that the muscle, all of this muscle mass, I like to think of that as moving one way, and then I like to think of the bone as moving another way. So even if I don't entirely see it, I mean, I can actually kind of see this plane break. I like to, number one, make sure it's there, and if it's not there, I like to just put it in. And this is one of those things where it's like you draw and you sculpt what you know. But now that to me just adds a little bit more life than if we leave it flat like that. So just, put that, hold that in your mind, and then I'm gonna go to what it looks like now. It's just a little bit more energy. And energy, we live off energy for these sculptures. So I like to put that in there. And then I'm going to just check the silhouette as we go around. The vastus lateralis is a little cray-cray. Okay. Let's get this wrist. And then we call it. So I'm going to build volume. If you take the free class, you should have a class in there, the free class at Vertex or at kingslien.org. You'll have one that says squaring the sphere, and that's really what this is all about, is learning how to create structure in an organic surface. Oops. Taking it too far. Am I? I think it's just not placed correctly. Ah, that's what it is. That's not continuing its plane out. There we go. Small little detail that mixed me up. Ah. I'm gonna find for me it's structural again, like we talked about this. I'm not doing anatomy. That was just finding the high point. And then I create, just planes. Ah. Get the shoulder out of the way. Once you have those planes, you can go in and start thinking about anatomy and start to actually create, some really cool indications. But it's just so important that you have structure in there, and that structure takes priority. I think this is something that a lot of people miss. See that? I'm not thinking about the anatomy. As much as I am thinking about just simple planes. too hard to build that form with the clay brush. I was suffering quite a bit actually trying to make that work. So just make sure, you know, go in and use the inflate brush for stuff. It will make your life easier, because then it's just really just putting clay onto the model that you can then go in and plane. And now in order for me to do this further, I'm going to have to continue the next method, the usual method, which is, you know, you got to find the landmarks, right? And so I'm not finding the landmarks right now because I don't want to get into the arms just now. Just enough. And then we got this leg to finish, and I'm going to sketch this in relatively quick, a bulk for the gastrocnemius. Okay, that bulk I already know. Is going to come around like this, and it swings up here. It's going to have some body to the belly down below. It's going to be rounder on the inside. It's going to be straighter on the outside. Then the soleus underneath the gastrocnemius, that's going to come down to the, let's see if we can just indicate this. Yeah, that'll work. Looks like the gastrocnemius is going to drop a little bit, which is fine. I like that. And then I'm going to go soleus straight down to the heel. It's called the calcaneus. And again, the shoe approach, don't worry about the feet. You know, if you can sculpt the shoe, you can do everything you need at this stage. And personally, I feel like if you don't understand this basic shape, like it's pain. Okay. I sculpt across the form when it's just easier for me to like just it's easier for me to create these planes. It takes a little while for people to learn this particular approach to my style, but once you do, it's very powerful. Okay, that's a super boring line. Always look for boring ass lines like that. Try to find where the character is. Should become allergic to boring lines. And voila, folks. Woof. What do you think? That is a bit of a bunch of work. Long story short, let me save this. How many undos do I have? Yeah, I didn't think I had a ton. Or actually, it may have been shaving undos. So I'm going to save this as 9. because when it starts to run into memory issues, it starts to shave undos and remove them. But let me ask you now, while this thing is saving, and since we're here at the end, we've got an hour and a half in today. Thank you so much for being here, for being a part of this, and showing up. But tell me, what is one thing that you really learned out of seeing today? One thing that you think would be like really helpful in your experience. And if you're watching this later, just leave it in the comments. If you're not watching this live, that I'm trying to give you guys everything. I'm not hiding anything. I'm not holding anything back so that you buy the class or anything crazy like that. This process is so, it's not something where you just say, you know, you learn X and you can do Y. It's an unfolding. You have to allow this to unfold, and you have to give yourself time for it to unfold. And you have to do it wrong, and then do it right, and then do it wrong several more times. It unfolds. I'm a better sculptor now at 50 than I was when I started out. And a lot of that is just allowing time to do its thing, so to speak. All right. So enrollment for the course is closed tomorrow. You don't got a lot of time. So get in, get the class, and then you get this 4 weeks of me going in much more detail, diving into all of this, so that you can kind of sculpt, learn how to sculpt, and let me say it this way, so that you can learn how to apply the anatomical static knowledge to something that's more dynamic. That's really what this July drop is all about, is actually being more dynamic and learning how to apply it. And this figure, I mean, it's very dynamic. The shoulders are hunched. There's a little bit of a twist. The legs are twisted. I don't know why I chose this. It looked cool. Since then, it's been a process, if you will. And all right, so here you go. Questions, leave them. But otherwise, make sure you head over to kingslien.art and you enroll, because we are at the end. All right. Have an amazing day, amazing weekend. I will see you guys tomorrow, where we will work on the head, hopefully, and go from there. Take care. Welcome, Diaz. All right, take care. I'm stopping the stream. Thank you. Bye.